Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today. And what a great segue. Thank you, Kim, for the introduction, and a great segue from Simon's really exciting announcement about a B2B CAN award, a CAN Lion. So what I'm here to talk about is something that I feel very passionately about, and that is, as Kim said, the relationship between brands, clients, and their agencies, and how to make those sing so that indeed the great work that could come from those great relationships can happen. One of the things that we saw the pandemic escalate is something that we've been seeing for several years in our practice at Mercer Island Group, and that is how difficult it is, or how difficult it seems to be, for clients and agencies to kind of just do that relationship thing just right. And in the world of Zoom, where people aren't in the same room together as we are not today, it gets even harder. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of what we think at Mercer Island Group are the ways to get to this great relationship. And I'm going to share some great examples with you. So Simon talked about this just a little bit. In the industry, the average length of a client agency relationship is 3.2 years. So now I want you to think about what that means, 3.2 years. So if you are a client that has an agency, figure it takes 6 to 8 months to onboard an agency before they're really kind of hitting their stride and doing their work. And if you're exiting out at 3.2 years, that means the last 6 months probably weren't great. So you probably have the average length of a late relationship where things are going well and the work and the client and the agency are really gelling. It's probably only 2 years. It's a lot of work to get to just 2 years of a great relationship. And if you are a client that has multiple agency relationships, 3, 4 agency relationships, you're probably under review with some agency or other almost all the time. So this 3.2 years is problematic. The average length, however, of the best client agency relationships, the 40 best client agency relationships, is 22 years. And I think Simon mentioned FedEx and BBDO have been together for 27 years. And Ogilvy, the relationship Ogilvy has had with Unilever's Dove dates back to the late 1950s. That's a long relationship. So what makes that work? We think that there are 2 obvious principles for this, 2 obvious overarching principles, which seem obvious but aren't necessarily. The first is transparency and honesty above all the way through. That means at the beginning of the relationship, during the pitch, sharing as a client, why is the business under review? What is the budget that you're expecting to be able to spend? How much media are you going to be spending? How much media are you going to be buying? How much are you expecting to pay in agency fees? All the way through. And agencies being transparent and honest about whether or not they have the bandwidth to pitch a piece of business. So it's from the very beginning all the way through the relationship, constant transparency and honesty. And the other is an understanding of each other's business. And what do I mean by that? So it's clear that the agency needs to understand the client's business, right? It needs to understand what's going on, not just in terms of advertising or media planning and buying, but what's actually happening in the business. What kinds of challenges is the business experiencing? Who's the competition? What's the competition doing? How's the target audience changed? How have the channels changed? It's everything to do with the brand, the industry, the competition, all of it. And then what are the aspirations and goals of the company? On the reverse side, I believe at Mercer Island Group that clients need to understand the agency business too. Clients are often unwilling to understand the agency model and how agencies make money, and what margin looks like for agencies, and sometimes get, I would say, kind of in the shorts of agencies to try to squeeze them to get the best value for the dollar. And that's not always the best way to have a great relationship. So transparency, honesty, understanding each other's business, these seem so obvious. But I'll tell you that in my experience looking at hundreds of agency pitch presentations and conversations with clients and agencies, and then working with clients and agencies while they're in their relationships, we don't see these things. They're just not there in common practice. 3 keys to success. So how can you as a client and you as an agency actually nail that longer agency relationship? And we believe that there are 3 keys: strong starts, guidance and process, and investing the time. Let me talk about each one. So those strong starts. There are 3 parts to a strong start for an agency-client relationship. The pitch process itself, which I think is often overlooked in terms of how important that is to the contribution of whether or not an agency-client relationship will be a great one. Onboarding and transition. So let me talk about each one in a little more detail. I liken the pitching exercise as dating. This is a dating process. You've got a client, you've got an agency, clients looking for the perfect match. Agencies are looking for new matches to bring into the family, into the fold. And the pitch process is a dating process. And that means that on the client side and on the agency side, you need to be impressing the other partner, right? So how do you as a client and as an agency make a good first impression? I think agencies focus on this a lot because they're trying to impress a client. And I think clients think about it less during the pitch process than they should. And clients, little things like, for instance, Q&A calls, being on time, being present, having your camera turned on. It's kind of amazing to me how many pitches I've sat through in the last almost 2 years now, where clients will often have their cameras turned off. And the agency is sitting and leaning into the camera, trying to get some feedback from the client in terms of whether or not what they're asking, what they're suggesting, what they're putting out there is resonating at all with the client team. So clients being really willing to dive in and be 100% into the dating process is critically important to the success of the relationship as you think about this as the starting point. Just simple etiquette and full openness in terms of what you're willing to do, what you're willing to share, and sharing more info so agencies can do a really great job and showing you what they can do is really important during the pitch process. Pitching is dating. So once you get through that process and a couple of dates in and you've someone's proposed marriage to someone else, usually the client proposes marriage to the agency, what happens next? The agency is hired on. Onboarding is a critically important part of starting out and having a great agency-client relationship. And this is true no matter what kind of agency you are, and that doesn't matter which industry you're in. And this is a time when the clients must fully participate in the onboarding process, so the agency has all the information they need to learn about your business. Often what will happen is everyone's really excited about the new relationship and the work starts. And the client, the agency is left on their own to figure out and learn the business. And 6 months in, the client is surprised that the agency hasn't learned the business. So we recommend, so something you can take home and start doing, we recommend that clients and agencies have an in-person, if possible, now that COVID is starting to loosen up some of the in-person possibilities, but we've actually done these virtually as well during the pandemic, 2 to 3 day downloads and deep dives, onboarding sessions where the client and the agency are in the room together, whether it's in the Zoom room or in the room, the physical room, where there is a set agenda for a few days where the subject matter experts on the client side can download the business to the agencies. It's a bit drinking from a fire hose for the agencies, but I've never had an agency come back to me and say, wow, that was terrible. I wish we hadn't done that. In fact, I've had agencies come to me years later, many years later, and say, you know, I remember that onboarding we did years ago, and I'm thinking of one in particular in a B2B space that we did years ago, where I've had agency folks who've left the agency, gone other places, and still remember that agency onboarding because they knew that they could hit the ground running. So think about the runway that you shorten in a way for the client, the agency to be able to take off sooner and be able to do the great work. We also believe that an onboarding should have a 30, 60, 90-day plan, so that in the first 30, 60, 90 days, there are shared expectations of what will happen between the agency and the client. I remember doing a review not all that long ago, where the agency was going to need to hire on some people to work the business. And the client knew that, and everything was fine. It happens all the time. And in the 30, 60, 90-day planning, the agency shared that they thought by the end of 60 days, they'd have everyone hired. And the client said, so no, our expectation is that we'd have the team within 30 days. Could we have the conversation so that everyone could understand what was expected in the first 30, the next 30, and the next 30 days? That's an important thing to happen during an onboarding. And the building of the camaraderie. This is a marriage. Agencies and clients talk to each other every day, met multiple times. The name's in your inbox. If you're the client, you see the agency in your inbox. If you're the agency, you see the client in your inbox. You want to feel excited when you see that person's name in your inbox. So building a camaraderie beyond just the work is really important. The intangibles, those are the things that, what does end of day mean? How many meetings are we going to be having? Are we expecting weekly meetings, bi-weekly meetings? And end of day is one of my favorites, especially if you're across different time zones. So getting those little things straightened out during an onboarding can make all the difference in going forward. And then the last thing that we suggest in an onboarding is what we call marriage vows. And this is a chance for an agency and a client to sit together and make promises to each other about what the relationship will be. You know, the onboarding, the first 30 days is kind of a honeymoon. It's a chance, everyone's excited about, hopefully everyone's excited about the relationship. Sometimes there's a small client team that gets to meet the agency during pitches and a larger client team that hasn't had a chance to meet them. And onboarding gives you the chance for the entire client team to meet the full agency team that's going to be working on the business, and then to put together what we call marriage vows, or client and agency mutual agreements. And here's one that we did several years ago. And this was a B2B relationship where the client and the agency pulled together these agreements with each other to doing things like creating an environment that encourages us to express radical candor in everything we do and resolve differences. All the way to the very last one here, which is to choose to be in love every day. They were feeling pretty excited about kicking off the relationship. And after the onboarding, they were even more excited. And so they put it on paper, the way that a couple does when they first start out, saying, yeah, I actually, this is what I promised you, and taking time to reflect to make sure that this happens. I know we're spending a lot of time on that first upfront, but a great relationship has an amazingly strong foundation. And this is one of the ways to get to that strong foundation. So now you've got your strong foundation. What happens next? Guidance and process is the second key, we believe, to strong, amazing, long client agency relationships. When I talk about guidance and process, what I'm talking about are these 4 elements. The first is communication. Second is briefing. The third is managing the work. And the fourth is feedback. I'll talk about each one just a little bit here. Communication means setting up a communication workflow where I know the best way to reach you. I know what your back phone is. I know how to get a hold of you if I need you. I know how long it takes you to respond to things. We decide in advance how we're going to react and respond to emails. Do I have to acknowledge receipt? All of those kinds of things, ongoing communication, and what are the rules of the road. The second is briefing. In today's world, 1/3 of an agency's time is wasted due to poor client briefing. Now, briefing is one of those interesting skills that's not taught anywhere. You know, take a college class on how to write a great brief. Most people come into the marketing field and they learn along the way how to write a great brief by watching other people who do write good briefs. They learn how to write better briefs. We actually believe at Mercer Island Group that clients need to learn how to write great briefs, and that agencies depend on those briefs to be able to come back with a strong creative brief, where everyone can agree on what the creative is going to look like. And that leads to really great feedback sessions and great work that then gets you that Cannes Lion that we heard about a little bit earlier. The third thing on this list is managing the work. Creating workflows, written workflows, whether they're decks or flow charts, whatever makes sense for you. where everyone understands what are the steps in getting from kicking off a campaign to measuring the effectiveness of the campaign, and what are all of the steps in the middle, and who's responsible for which things. So clients and agencies understand also what's the time frame set for each of those blocks, so that we know if we're running hot, we're running cold on hours, we know if we're running hot, we're running cold on timelines, and there's an expected way of getting the work done. And that's on the client to have their workflow managed, but for the agency to weigh in and make sure that the way that the work is supposed to happen fits the way that the agency expects it to work, so that you've got some kind of collaboration there. And the last is one of my favorites, and that's feedback. In my world, feedback is a gift. If you get great feedback, it's a gift from someone who cares enough about you to give it to you. We think great feedback, great creative feedback is the key to great creative work. If there's a great creative brief and the creative comes to you, then giving the feedback should be based on that brief. And we suggest a 3-step model for giving creative feedback. And the first is actually saying what you saw or heard, could be a radio piece or video, then sharing what you thought or felt when you saw or heard that, and then a question or suggestion for what could go forward. So imagine the following. If I were to see a piece of creative and I took a look at it, and I noticed that the call to action was missing, I might say something like, when I saw the creative that you presented today, it didn't have a call to action, and I thought it was a bit off brief, as the call to action was clearly called out in the brief. So I'm wondering how you might include that in the next round. So notice the difference here in what typically happens when a client and agency share feedback, which is, I don't like the work, you're missing stuff that was in the brief. I would like you to put this here on the bottom and the left-hand corner and use these words. What I'm suggesting is a bit of a different approach, which is for clients to actually share with agencies a suggestion or a question as to why or how the agency might solve for the problem, and leave the creative team to be the creatives, and have the client team actually evaluate the work based on that brief. It's a game changer in terms of getting to better work faster and fewer rounds of creative. All right, investing the time. What does that mean in terms of how to get to great relationships? We do believe that investing the time in great relationships is critically important to getting to those long relationships that we talked about at the beginning. We suggest quarterly meetings, interagency teams, if you have a kind of a stable of agencies, a roster of agencies, annual planning, and just getting together to get to know each other. But these meetings should be about the business and the relationship. Often a client downloads an agency when they onboard, but they forget to update the agency on what's happening on the business side along the way. And agencies forget to refresh strategy after they've won the business. And I love that Simon talked about that simple insight that brings you to great creative. That requires great strategy, and great strategy needs to be refreshed on a regular basis. So quarterly meetings and annual planning is really important. And I know it takes time away from the day-to-day work, but it really gets you to that great work that gets to those longer relationships, and then to those awards and to great business results. And this is true in all industries. And I think particularly in the B2B space, where sometimes the spend isn't quite as big, and that some of the companies don't always emphasize marketing as much as they do sales. And we want to make sure that the marketing is being able to ladder up to the business itself. So in wrapping up, I've talked a lot about agencies and clients, and I've used the metaphor, the marriage metaphor quite a lot. I think what I would say in closing on this is that clients must place an importance on the relationship. Ultimately, you, the client, are accountable for the investment in the agency and the direction of the work. Don't ignore it and expect it to get done without your input. Agencies, in closing, what I'd say to you is be passionate about the work and the business. Do your homework. Be willing to say you don't know what you don't know. Ground your thinking in data and strategy as really the great creative doesn't come without great strategy. It's only a pretty picture. So how long will your relationships last? 3.2 years, 22 years, somewhere in between? I think it's up to you. Thank you.
Robin, having been a leader in in-house agencies now at Deloitte and working with external agencies, everything you said is it's all common sense. All your observations are so spot on. After all, how many of us on the agency side, or really on the client side for that matter, have had a brand agency relationship for 20 plus years? I don't know that there are many of us who have had that.
There aren't many.
Yeah. So I really love the analogy of choosing love, because that's what really will make life better. So I have two-part question for you.
Sure.
What are the biggest mistakes clients make that get in the way of a great relationship and partnership?
I think the biggest mistakes, and I actually, I don't even have to think about it that hard. I have data that I could, I don't have the data at my fingertips, but there's data in my brain that leads me to the answer. And when we work with clients and agencies to help kind of fix relationships, a little marriage counseling, if I just extend the metaphor a little bit further, when we interview agencies at what are clients doing wrong or what are clients not doing enough of, briefing is there are two things. One is briefing, that the client is not briefing the agency properly and not writing a strategic brief, a marketing brief, a communications brief that explains what the purpose of the work is. Why are we doing this work? What are we trying to achieve? What are the business goals and the KPIs that we're going to measure so we know if we did a good job? Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. The second is when a client does not have a unified approach to evaluating creative. And so a junior person will evaluate creative the agency brings, and then changes will get made. It'll go to the next level and it's different feedback. And then it goes to the decision maker and it's yet different feedback again. And that's really rough on agencies. And it's hard for clients. I just want agencies to know how hard it is for clients to develop proxies within their own organization. Mm-hmm. This is something agencies actually can help clients with, I think. And that clients, I mean, especially a new CMO comes in and they're looking at the work completely differently. And she or he has a team of people who have no idea how to evaluate the creative the way she does. Mm-hmm. So pulling together that team and developing proxies is really important. But that's another, those are the two things I think that stand out as the biggest mistakes clients make that lead to shorter relationships.
All right. Flip the coin. What are the biggest mistakes agencies are making?
Yeah. I think, I don't know if this will be surprising or not, but I think the biggest mistakes agencies make is a client service. It's when the client service falls apart and the relationship becomes transactional and commoditized. Mm-hmm. And I would pair that with turnover on the agency side. Now, in the real world, there's more turnover on the agency side than on the client side. It is just the world that we live in. It's the way that agency people get promoted to agencies is to move. Clients tend to stay longer. So clients have to just kind of get over it that there's people going to change on the agency side, but agencies are responsible for making it seamless for the client, right? So if I get new people on my team, I shouldn't feel like I have to onboard them. I've already spent 3 days onboarding this agency. I do not need to keep onboarding the agency. The agency needs to onboard its own people. So that seamless transition from person to person is really important. But when the agency team stops delivering great client service, that's when the relationship starts to falter. It's not the creative, it's not the strategy that all clients expect to work hard on that with their agencies. But if they're not being treated really well by the agency, if it's not a highlight of their day to talk to their agency, then things start to go south.
So true. So very true. Robin, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
May your session be the start of lasting relationships and great work across B2B.